Today's Tonight novel story. Sidney Sheldon, The Sands of Time. This is a work of fiction, and yet, the romantic land of flamenco and Don Quixote, an exotic-looking senorita with tortoise-shell combs in their hair, is also the land of Torquemada. The Spanish Inquisition, and one of the bloodiest civil wars in history. More than 500,000 people lost their lives in the battles for power between the Republication and the rebel nationalists in Spain. In 1936, between February and June, 269 political murders were committed, and the nationalists executed Republicans at the rate of 1,000 a month, with no mourning permitted. 160 churches were burned to the ground, and nuns were removed forcibly from convents, as though, wrote the Duc de Saint-Simon, of an earlier conflict between the Spanish government and the church, they were whores in a bawdy house. Newspaper offices were sacked, and strikes and riots were endemic throughout the land. The Civil War ended in a victory for the nationalists under Franco, and, following his death, Spain became a monarchy. The Civil War, which lasted from 1936 to 1939, may be officially over, but the to Spain that fought it have never been reconciled. Today, another war continues to rage in Spain, the guerrilla war fought by the Basques to regain the autonomy they had won under the Republic and lost under the Franco regime. The war is being fought with bombs, bank robberies to finance the bombs, assassinations, and riots. When a member of ETA, a Basque guerrilla underground group, died in a Madrid hospital after being tortured by the police. The nationwide riots that followed led to the resignation of the Director General of Spain's police force, 5 security chiefs, and 200 senior police officers. In 1986, in Barcelona, the Basques publicly burned the Spanish flag, and in Pamplona 1,000 fled in fear when Basque nationalists clashed with police in a series of mutinies that eventually spread across Spain and threatened the stability of the government. That paramilitary police retaliated by going on a rampage, firing at random at Basques' home and shops. The terrorism that goes on is more violent than ever. Dealing with too turbulent week in 1976, this is a work of fiction. And yet, Chapter 1, Pamplona, Spain 1976. If the plan goes wrong, we will all die. He went over it again in his mind for the last time, probing, testing, searching for flaws. He could find none. The plan was daring, and it called for careful, split-second timing. If it worked, it would be a spectacular fear, worthy of the great LCID. If it failed, well, the time for worrying is past. Jaime Miró thought philosophically. It's time for action. Jaime Miró was a legend, a hero to the Basque people and anathema to the Spanish government. He was 6 feet tall, with a strong, intelligent face, a muscular body, and brooding dark eyes. Witnesses tended to describe him as taller than he was, fiercer than he was, darker than he was, fiercer than he was. He was a complex man, a realist who understood the enormous odds against him, a romantic ready to die for what he believed. Pamplona was a town gone mad. It was the final morning of the running of the bulls, the Fiesta de San Fermin, the annual celebration held from 7th July to 14th. 30,000 visitors had swarmed into the city from all over the world. Sam had come merely to watch the dangerous bull running spectacle, others to prove their manhood by taking part in it, running in front of the charging beasts. All the hotel rooms had long since been taken, and university students from Navra had bedded down in doorways, bank entrances, cars, the public square, and even the streets and pavements of the town. The tourists packed the cafes and hotels, watching the noisy, colorful parades of papier mâché gigants, and listening to the music of the marching bands. Members of the parade wore violet cloaks, some with hoods of green, others garnet, and still others wearing golden hoods. Flowing through the streets, the processions looked like rivers of rainbows. Exploding firecrackers running along poles and wires of the tramways added to the noise and general confusion. The crowd had come to attend the evening bullfights, but the most spectacular event was the encierro, the early morning running of the bulls that would fight later in the day. 10 minutes before midnight in the darkened streets of the lower part of town, the bulls had been driven from the corrals de gas, the reception pens, to run across the river on a bridge to the corral at the bottom of Cal Santo Domingo, where they would be kept for the night. In the morning, they would be turned loose to run along the narrow Cal Santo Domingo, penned in the street by wooden barricades at each corner, until at the end they would run into the corrals at the Plaza de Hemingie, where the would be held until the afternoon bullfight. From midnight until 6 a.m., the visitors stayed awake, drinking and singing and making love, too excited to sleep. Those who would participate in the running of the bulls wore the red scarves of San Fermin around their throats. At 5:45 in the morning, bands started circulating through the streets, playing the stirring music on Navarre. At 7 o'clock sharp, a rocket flew into the air to signal that the gates of the corral had been opened. The crowd was filled with feverish anticipation. Moments later, a second rocket went up to warn the town that the bulls were running. What followed was an unforgettable spectacle. First came the sound. It started as a faint, distant ripple on the wind, almost imperceptible, and then it grew louder and louder until it became an explosion of pounding hoofs, and suddenly bursting into view appeared 6 oxen and 6 enormous bulls. Each weighing 1,500 pounds, they charged down the Cal Santo Domingo like deadly express trains. Inside the wooden barricades that had been placed at each intersecting street corner to keep the bulls confined to the one street were hundreds of eager, nervous men who intended to prove their bravery by facing the maddened animals. The bulls raced down from the far end of the street, past the Cal Lestrafeta and the Cal de Javier, past farmacias and clothing stores and fruit markets, towards the Plaza de Hemingway, and there were cries of "Ole" from the frenzied crowd. As the animals charged nearer, a mad scramble began to escape the sharp horns and lethal hoofs. The sudden reality of approaching death made some of the participants run for the safety of doorways and fire escapes. They were followed by taunts of "Cobardan, coward." A few in the path of the bulls stumbled and fell and were quickly hauled to safety. A small boy and his grandfather were standing behind the barricades, both breathless with the excitement of the spectacle taking place only a few feet from them. "Look at them," the old man exclaimed, "Magnifico." The little boy shuddered, "Tengo miedo, abuelo." "I'm afraid." The old man put his arm around him. "See, Manuelo, it is frightening, but wonderful too. I once ran with the bulls. There's nothing like it. You test yourself against death, and it make you feel like a man." As a rule, it took 2 minutes for the animals to gallop the 900 yards along the Cal Santo Domingo to the arena. And the moment the bulls were safely in the corral, a third rocket would be sent into the air. On this day, the third rocket did not go off, for an incident occurred that never happened in Pamplona's 400-year history of the running of the bulls. As the animals raced down the narrow street, half a dozen men dressed in the colorful costumes of the faria shifted the wooden barricades, and the bulls found themselves forced off the restricted street and turned loose into the heart of the city. What had a moment before being a happy celebration instantly turned into a nightmare. The frenzied beasts charged into the stunned onlookers. The young boy and his grandfather were among the first to die, knocked down and trampled by the charging bulls. Vicious horns sliced into a baby's pram, killing as infant, and sending its mother down to the ground to be crushed. Death was in the air everywhere. The animals crashed into helpless bystanders, knocking down women and children, plunging their long, deadly horns into pedestrians, food stands, statues, sweeping aside everything unlucky enough to be in their path. People were screaming in terror, desperately fighting to get out of the way of the lethal behemoths. A bright red truck suddenly appeared in the path of the bulls, and they turned and charged towards it, down the Cal de Estrella, the street that led to the Cárcel, Pamplona's prison. The Cárcel is a forbidding-looking two-story stone building with heavily barred windows. There are turrets at each of its four corners, and the red and yellow Spanish flag flies over the door. A stone gate leads to a small courtyard. The second floor of the building consists of a row of cells that holds prisoners condemned to die. Inside the prison, a heavy-set guard in the uniform of the Policfa Armada was leading a priest garbed in plain black robes along the second-floor corridor. The Poliethe Cárcel is a forbidding-looking two-story stone building with heavily barred windows. There are turrets at each of its four corners, and the red and yellow Spanish flag flies over the door. A stone gate leads to a small courtyard. The second floor of the building consists of a row of cells that holds prisoners condemned to die. Inside the prison, a heavy-set guard in the uniform of the Policfa Armada was leading a priest garbed in plain black robes along the second-floor corridor. The policeman carried a submachine gun. Noting the questioning look in the priest's eye at the sight of the weapon, the guard said, "One can't be too careful here, Father. We have the scum of the earth on this floor." The guard directed the priest to walk through a metal detector very much like those used at airports. "I'm sorry, Father, but the rules." "Of course, my son." As the priest passed through the security portal, a shrieking siren cut through the corridor. The guard instinctively tightened his grip on his weapon. The priest turned and smiled back at the guard. "My mistake," he said as he removed a heavy metal cross that hung from his neck on a silver chain and handed it to the guard. This time as he passed through, the machine was silent. The guard handed the cross back to the priest and to continue their journey deeper into the bowels of the prison. The stench in the corridor near the cells was overpowering. The guard was in a philosophical mood. "You know, you're wasting your time here, Father. These animals have no souls to save. Still, we must try, my son." The guard shook his head. "I tell you, the gates of hell are waiting to welcome both of them." The priest looked at the guard in surprise. "Both of them? I was told there were 3 who needed confession." The guard shrugged. "We saved you some time. Jamora died in the infirmary this morning. Heart attack." The men had reached the 2 farthest cells. "Here we are, Father." The guard unlocked a cell door, then stepped cautiously back as the priest entered the cell. The guard locked the door again and stood in the corridor, alert for any sign of trouble. The priest went to the figure lying on the dirty prison cot. "Your name, my son?" "Ricardo Melado." The priest stared down at him. It was difficult to tell what the men looked like. His face was swollen and raw. His eyes were almost shut. Through thick lips, he said, "I'm glad you were able to come, Father." The priest replied, "Your salvation is the church's duty, my son." "They are going to hang me this morning?" The priest patted his shoulder gently. "You have been sentenced to die by the garrote." Ricardo Melado stared up at him. "No, I'm sorry, the order was given by the Prime Minister himself." The priest placed his hand on the prisoner's head and intoned, "Dimi tus pecados." Ricardo Melado said, "I have sinned greatly in thought, word and deed. I repent all my sins with all my heart. Ruego a nuestro Padre Celestial para la salvación de tu alma. In el nombre del Padre, de Hijo y del Espíritu Santo." The guard listening outside the cell thought to himself, "What a stupid waste of time. God will spit in that one's eye." The priest was finished. "Adios, my son. May God receive your soul in peace." The priest moved to the cell door and the guard unlocked it, then stepped back, keeping his gun aimed at the prisoner. When the door was locked again, the guard moved to the adjoining cell and opened the door. "He's all yours, Father." The priest stepped into the second cell. The man inside had also been badly beaten. The priest looked at him a long moment. "What is your name, my son?" Flex Carpio. He was a husky, bearded man with a fresh, livid scar on his cheek that the bread failed to conceal. "I'm not afraid to die, Father." "That is well, my son. In the end, none of us is spared." As the priest began to hear Carpio's confession, waves of distant sound, at first muffled, then growing louder, began to reverberate through the building. It was the thunder of pounding hoofs and the screams of the running mob. The guard listened, stalled. These sounds were rapidly moving closer. "You'd better hurry, Father." Something peculiar is happening outside. I'm finished. The guard quickly unlocked the cell door. The priest stepped out into the corridor, and the guard locked the door behind him. There was the sound of a long crash from the front of the prison. The guard turned to peer out the narrow, barred window. What the hell was that noise? The priest said. It sounded as though someone wishes an audience with us. May I borrow that? Borrow what? Your weapon, par favor. As the priest spoke, he stepped close to the guard. He silently removed the top of the large cross that hung around his neck, revealing a long, wicked-looking stiletto. In one lightning move, he plunged the knife into the guard's chest. You see, my son, Jame Miro said, as he pulled the submachine gun from the dying Gurad's hands, God and I decided that you no longer have need of this weapon. The guard slumped to the cement floor. Jame Miro took the keys from the body and swiftly opened the two cell doors. The sounds from the street were getting louder. Let's move, Jame commanded. Ricardo Mellado picked up the machine gun. You make a damned good priest. You almost convinced me. He tried to smile with his swollen mouth. They really worked you two over, didn't they? Don't worry. They to pay for it. Jame Miro put his arms around the two men and helped them down his corridor. What happened to Jamora? The guards beat him to death. We could hear his screams. They took us off to the infirmary and said he died of a heart attack. Ahead of them was a locked iron door. Wait here, Jame Miro said. He approached the door and said to the guard on the other side, I'm finished here. The Gurad unlocked the door. You'd better hurry, father. There's some kind of disturbance going on out. He never finished his sentence. As Jame's knife went into him, blood welled out of the guard's mouth. Jame motioned to the two men, come on. Felix Carpio picked up the guard's gun, and they started downstairs. The scene outside was chaos. The police were running around frantically trying to see what was happening, and to deal with the crowds of screaming people in the courtyard, who were screaming people in the courtyard, who were scrambling to escape the madded bulls. One of the bulls had charged into the front of the building, smashing the stone entrance. Another was tearing into the body of a uniformed guard on the ground. The red truck was in the courtyard, its motor ruining. In the confusion, the three-man went almost unnoticed. Those who did see them were too busy saving themselves to do anything about him. Without a word, Jame and his men jumped into the back of the truck and it sped off. Scattering frantic pedestrians through the crowded streets, the Guardia Civil, the paramilitary rural police decked out in green uniforms and black patent leather hats, were trying in vain to control the hysterical mob. The Policia Armada, stationed in provincial capitals, were also helpless in the face of the mad spectacle. People were struggling to flee in every direction, desperately trying to avoid the enraged bulls. The danger lay less with the bulls and more with the people themselves as they trampled one another in their eagerness to escape, and old men and women were pushed aside under the feet of the running mob. Jame stared in dismay at the stunning spectacle. It wasn't planned for it to happen this way, he exclaimed. He stared helplessly at the carnage that was being wreaked, but there was nothing he could do to stop it. He closed his eyes to shut out the sight. The truck reached the outskirts of Pamplona and headed south, leaving behind the noise and confusion of the rioting. Where are we going, Jaime? Ricardo Mellado asked. Their safe house outside door. We'll stay there until dark and then move on. Felix Carpio was wincing with pain. Jaime Miro watched him, his face filled with compassion. We'll be there soon, my friend, he said gently. He was unable to get the terrible scene at Pamplona out of his mind. 30 minutes later they approached the little village of Tor and skirted it to drive to an isolated house in the mountains above the village. Jaime Miro helped the two men out of the back of the red truck. You'll be picked up at midnight, the driver said. Have them bring a doctor, Jaime replied, and get rid of the truck. The three of them entered the house. It was a farmhouse, simple and comfortable, with a fireplace in the living room and a beamed ceiling. There was a note on the table. Jaime Miro read it and smiled at the welcoming farce. Mi case es su casa. On the bar were bottles of wine. Jaime Miro poured drinks. Ricardo Mellado said, There are no words to thank you. My friend, here's to you. Jaime raised his glass. Here's to freedom. There was the sudden chirp of a canary in a cage. Jaime Miro walked over to it, and he watched its wild fluttering for a moment. Then he opened the cage, gently lifted the bird out, and carried it to an open window. Fly away, Pajarito, he said softly. All living creatures should be free.